Let's now consider a specific type of low interactivity content collection, the lecture, whether in person or online. But how can we make this learning moment as effective as possible? Let's look at 4 possible strategies. The first strategy is to place the topic of the upcoming lecture within the overall structure of the course and in relation to the content already covered. This can be done using a concept map, a timeline, or whichever schematic representation is considered most effective. For example, if the topic is Romanesque architecture, one might recall that the course began with cave art, will end with Baroque art, and that the lecture on Romanesque architecture marks the halfway point of the journey. In this way, students gain an overall view, making it easier to introduce comparisons between different periods and to highlight the elements of continuity and discontinuity from one style to another. The second strategy is to work on the narrative structure of the lesson. When we tell something, whether consciously or unconsciously, we adopt a narrative structure that is not just a stylistic choice, but also the filter through which we present content to our audience, also suggesting a particular way of interpreting it. Narrative structures vary and can be more or less effective depending on the content and the learning outcome associated with that content. A temporal narrative structure can, for example, aid understanding when dealing with production cycles, as it illustrates the various phases and their relationships in a sequential manner. A thematic structure, on the other hand, helps to view a particular aspect or topic from multiple perspectives and in a cross-cutting way. For example, the types of religious buildings and architectural styles across different cultures. If, on the other hand, students need to develop the ability to evaluate information, ideas or specific contexts and identify strategies and possible interventions, narrative structures that start from problems or questions can be very effective as they stimulate reflection. For example, how can the problem of the frequent flooding of the Seveso River be addressed? Or what caused the Vajont disaster? Or again, do chemical processes remain unchanged when it comes to biochemistry? Another narrative approach that is useful in many cases is the inductive one, which starts from concrete experiences and examples and only later arrives at the theory. For instance, showing examples of deformed railway tracks before addressing the causes of metal deformation, and perhaps prompting students to retrace the cause-effect relationships. The third strategy that can be adopted to increase the effectiveness of a lecture is to provide many concrete examples. As human beings, in fact, we are more inclined to remember concrete information rather than abstract ideas, and so it can be very effective when presenting a complex concept to suggest a metaphorical image at the beginning that helps provide an overall view before diving into detailed analysis. The expected learning outcomes, for example, can be represented as the destination of a journey that the guide must lead to. But also showing real-life examples, especially if accompanied by images, helps with understanding, memorization, and later retrieval of information. However, be careful, because simply presenting concrete examples is not enough to ensure effective learning support. The danger, in fact, is that students may only memorize the most superficial aspects without grasping the underlying idea. In some studies, students were presented with real-world problems, and shortly afterward, they were given similar problems but in different contexts. Even though they had just seen and solved a similar situation, very few were able to abstract the solution from the first problem and apply it to the second. So how can we ensure that the use of examples doesn't become a distraction, but rather a helpful aid? For example, one can go over the transition from the example to the abstract conceptualization and back again multiple times, guiding the connection between the details and the underlying structure. Because if this connection becomes familiar to the student, the example truly becomes the key to more easily retrieving the underlying concepts and theories. And another thing that can be done is to make explicit in the explanation which aspects of the example are the most salient and relevant, because students are not always able to identify them on their own. The fourth and final strategy we'll look at is instead related to the concept of dual coding. But what is dual coding and why is it so important? When we are presented with both visual and textual information, we activate different channels to process them and automatically connect them to each other. In this way, we stimulate a more complex, elaborative process compared to activating just a single channel, and it also becomes more likely that we will later recall this information. In this case as well, it's important to take certain precautions, such as properly integrating text and images, because if the text is not positioned correctly, there's a risk of creating excessive cognitive load, leading to the automatic selection of only one coding channel. And just as it's advisable to avoid graphic backgrounds, music, or animations that don't add value to the content, this is precisely to prevent attention from being scattered and to ensure that the student focuses on the key information.